Hello, valutainment. I don't know them, but they have sources. And the FBI sources in themselves. They have collusions with former standing chairperson on the Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organization Act, and with James Comey too. Increasingly, people with the courts too, Harvard courts, Connecticut District Court, and New Britain Superior Court, their family members, and the different natures of conjunctions to themselves, and the identities of their victims, of their positions. Like there are victims advocates that are increasingly involved with overt criminal enterprises and private ones. And then when I catch them with that and roles with worse uses of it roles, the breach, their criminally foreign influence that the state judicial branch offices and corrections offices of Connecticut. Increasingly, like there's a Mike Levine, that a principal child abuser named Michael Bean. He switched his name. Then he said, "Oh, Michael Bean." And they made all these confessions and things that I caught them doing. And what brought the campus up to me, and they hid that from the parents, with some of the parents. There are medical and sexual offenders of kids, and there are roles with overt criminal enterprises and private ones, actually, with the roles with like triages throughout the country, involved concentrated though at Harvard Hospital in Connecticut. They have all kinds of they're forging transcripts, fake ties to people and their family members, and they're forcing abuses of people's kids and putting everyone in fake. And the investigators are collusions with it. They're being used to sense and it's all kinds of natures of organized crime at the same time. That's why it's so overtly they get away with it, like pretending they could speak for the law. They don't even have black people's rights of eyes attended to, and how our founders communicated about how the breaching method reassigned with nature communicates. How our founders declassified also about how and why really we had to start with the economies and with the country speaking about economies, a fake A through Z, including here. When do we get the private criminal enterprises? Their rules with what witch trials are about. Witch trials about which slavery was entrenched at the same time. You don't leave those things out. Oh, let's do that, a separate subject. In other words, this is a breaching method. There's a whole bunch of people tied to the educators. I never saw him on a campus in my life. I forgot his name now. Uh, but anyway, with car dealerships, people from Weathersfield involved with car dealerships. Increasingly, people with conjunctions to Route 3 and conjunctions to that, like the state judicial branch offices. They have roles also with intercities from Weathersfield, with that, as with people at and next to Harvard Hospital, involved with overt criminal enterprises and private ones, all kinds of legal scams and delusions with the triages, with their replacing what our founders declassified. And they declassified for us to refer to our founders plural as James Madison, the person singular, his plan they used, the plural founders, which includes Native Americans. Nature itself shows us that, but also president slash chief in that plan. How to? You guys have it replaced with about what they communicated about that, and no one will allow anyone to be honest about the extortion of George Washington, or it would have brought up how he was also counter extorted. But glad to counter extort, to use that plan and to join them and to counter extort the other founders and to force them to be. Even slavery was entrenched in northern colonies, southern colonies, and there were more than 13. That means roles with that had been entrenched, sustained. That means all kinds of negative value nature progressions, acts of nature's hyper additional too had been caused. And everyone blamed other things, others, themselves, that they were sensed. And through their own sense, not doing that. Because it was against the law not to do that. Not just because it was against the law. The law had collusions with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and that which had slavery non-distinctly northern colonies and southern colonies, but through other identities of possession. that themselves, countries A through Z, it is we could observe through time, through history. One of the things principally that was actually reported out, how every individual, country even, could be tortured, extorted, in fact, human nature enslaved, therefore physically, by a method that got people needing to counter what a hyperforeign did, not names A through Z, to exploit how countries' names could only be operated by locations, areas, and states' names, which have only been known as names, needs, natures, and styles as systems of difference, tactical terror from natures, that which has us, individual species body, of individual bodies, with all group differences shown to us that they are generated by that which is generating the other species bodies too. Distinct from ourselves, but also non-distinct from ourselves, and simultaneous with ourselves, but also per that further distinct identity of simultaneous nature. See, but those campuses have been abridged since some ancient times. They've been measuring, they've been attaching people to faked and changed communications. I barely had any words with a Trantola and Trantola. They are one of the lawyers. I mean, one of the lawyers, yeah. But involved with one of the people that put ad placements. Also, Facebook has roles with ad placements with networks, involved with them with digital crimes and wire crimes and the differences of guilt there. And they already have roles with states and with federal prosecutors and judges and forensics names, with criminally foreign influence, tactical delusions, readings and writings of statutes and precedents. All this is recorded. They are also recorded showing that they need to hide that by taking collusion/S with all natures of crime scenes to change and fake details, to hide what the value of the court is. Sick collusions way worse than they put even little kids and adults, even framed ones completely, in jail for. People can't afford a bond. They put a heavy bond, put them in jail. They put more fake things in every day in those jails. That's their job. Oh, but that's my job. How many people said that since founding said that's my job? The only reason they got away with saying that is because everyone has rules with hyperforeign. You know, in other words, a whole bunch of different countries involved with the interbranch families, only 3 branches of government, that all their families and their conjunctions to them. Increasingly, a former Mayor Gold also has roles with these people on off the state judicial branch offices and corrections offices, with the agencies, and with where and how they have acting professors involved, and pretend to care for unmarked police forms, pretend to care for their safety. But to discern it, you have to see where they pretend that, where they'll get over on everyone else. Their difference is a fake difference. They are systems other than humanities, but they want to speak for humanity anyway. They better get me off the fake conversations with WFSB, Channel 3 News. These are also people with the Clinton Correctional Facility, covering live progressions with a Frankie Reese, and their roles with those people who escaped from the prison. I never met them. They were trying to pretend to know me on Facebook, even if it was someone pretending to be them, right while they were escaping. But also, these are people increasingly with the state corrections offices and judicial branch offices in Wethersfield, Connecticut, and the corrections offices at Wethersfield, Harpertown line. But these are people also involved intercities and intra-cities, and involved with a Dean Judd and his kids. I never met a Dean Judd. I never had a word of conversation with his kid. They were planting evidences with the phone of and sequence shifts with the phone of Eric Burgess, involved with a former director of the F.B.I, former standing chairperson on the Racketeering Influence of Corrupt Organizations Act, and his co-defendants and their family members, and their lawyer before the World Trade Center attack at the Britain locations in West Hartford locations, and from the Wethersfield, they had collusion/S with people that on all sides in Central Connecticut State University since I was a kid. They have roles with predicate acts with facts and databases, and then acting tied to that. Like, for example, they have collusions with databases at the campuses, and with WFSB, Connecticut's Channel 3 News. They have World Trade Center attack predicate acts, and with people with Saudi attackers that are forced collusions to Saudis and Americans, right? Where they didn't want collusions, but they have self-value rules. That's what the World Trade Center attack was effectively used to pull off. Their collusions also with Weathersfield police phones families and people tied to them. Note how that's 911. These are people that fake and change transcripts with other police departments and with the other agencies involved. Writing forensics is increasingly involved. Sandy Hook campuses, including a prison campus there, have roles with child abusers, leaders of kids, first force, as people also involved with body dumping spots, and the serial killer, the reported serial killer and his reported the body dumping spot and names next to it. Even if that was made up, the intelligence at Sandy Hook campuses had and has collusions with the World Trade Center attack, and with years apart, first force child abusers, leaders of kids, and ones who were child abused, then as adults, self-valued roles with that, with other child abusers. See, they're keeping fakes, pretending they're fake, or in other words, constantly all natures of investigators. They had little kids since they were kids. Sometimes it's their family members or themselves. Why and how they change and fake things and hide things when asked to things, to say things. Their time when people are going to be there, or act. They act and they pretend they fight. Or in other words, all that, they have behavior racketeering worse than war crimes, because they were shown how to speak and think through campuses that were sickly distinctly criminally foreign influence, but also sickly non-distinctly. Also to use functionally how that's left out, not valued. I mean, not paid attention to, even though that truth is generating more negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, and we can discern them being and having been forced by breaching roles, blaming other, use those things to blame other things, others themselves. The real cause of negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. Like in New York City, there was a breaching method clearer than day upon the people of the suburbs that were designed before America's founders were born. The house is designed for a torture, vacuum nature extortion, vacuum nature slavery method. Tactically, and the only means to cause positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures. To self-value criminal insidiousness natures, criminally foreign influence natures of means to cause positives as collusion /s. Specifically, those styles, needs, and natures of logic. For example, pretending they have free speech to an extent, otherwise being sentenced if they really try to have free speech and they don't pretend. In other words, including if they are a majority of people, including if they are everyone, and that's adapted to. The only reason that has been counter-adapted to by the entire species, in other words, is because everyone has stayed roles, blaming out other things, others themselves, with the breaching method caused. And then what roles with it caused and keeps. On a mass scale, Harvard Hospital, they put fake conversation, fake transcripts. They even forge other doctors' names and put fake transcripts too, because they have roles with the crime scenes. That's how they get away with having that. And the interbranch are forging and switching names. The written Superior Court and Harvard courts has roles at West Harvard locations before the World Trade Center attack, planting evidences and making confessions and requests to help by foreign and domestic military. The only one who verbally said they wanted help was Eric Burgess. And these are increasingly people, the strangers. I don't know. One of the things that ties to the courts, people with the corruption, they'd say, "Oh, well, don't tell her this." Like there's an Emily or Amy involved also with Officer Hunter. I don't know if it's his real name. They're playing games with Harper courts, with the FBI and this Officer Hunter intercities. He's involved with a bunch of people on Park Street, involved with Central, with some sexual and medical offenders of kids. They have roles with overt criminal enterprises and private ones, and all sides of criminal and civil cases. In the court's names, putting predicate acts with facts. Evidence is racketeering worse than war crimes. which is also why and how. Everyone has self-valued roles, communicating other about what caused the Civil War than what James Madison's plan. James Madison's plan caused the Civil War. We're supposed to know it. Our founders wanted nothing to do with slavery. You guys don't even defend our founders, let alone James. You don't even defend George Washington, our first president, let alone our founders. And then James Madison, when he was the president, he still didn't have free speech. That's declassified too. The breaching method was still entrenched. The roles with it were still entrenched. Anyone trying to counter it would be sensed by the breaching method. Pay attention why and how it had slavery non-distinctly, but also sickly distinctly northern and southern. We never paid attention to the non-distinct part. And pay attention to where and how you have our founders framed. Not one has trained. Vaccine.